I've got some sticks for my jewellery tree. I already had some, but just in case, I got a few more that have more branches off them for a better way to store jewellery. I also tried to get some bark, but every piece of bark I picked up had spiders or bugs all over it, so I'll have to keep trying for that. Anyway, there's no shortage of sticks around my place. We're near a national park here, so and even in my backyard I've got, you know, heaps of sticks and trees and everything, so not a shortage of that. So anyway, we'll see you back in the studio. Well, I've got a pretty good stash here, I think, probably more than I need. So a few pieces of bark with some really nice texture, fairly bug free. What I'll need to do is just clean everything up and get ready to paint and all of that. I'm a bit pooped because I've just come back from my walk collecting all this stuff. I'll see if I can zoom out so you can see how much I actually got. See the barbecue, and there's the branches. So they're not small branches by any stretch, but I think I've got some good ones that'll be good to use. So I start off with some acrylic paint, just a student quality acrylic paint, and I'm mixing a brown as the base. It's on a terracotta pot that I've got here. I chose this pot because it doesn't have any glaze on it, so it's porous and will allow the paint to absorb easily. So I've got sort of oranges and blacks. Together that makes a rich chocolate brown colour. Now, I know that the inside of this won't be showing, so I just paint around the top edge. If you know that your project will have more of the pot showing, then you could certainly paint further in. I just use my heat gun to help dry the paint, and that will allow me to move on to the next step a bit quicker. You could of course just let it air dry. I'm just wanting to get that dried quickly so I can keep going with the tutorial. Now the bark that I collected earlier, I'm just breaking off little pieces now and attaching it with a tacky glue. You want a glue that is quick drying and quite tacky, because it will just help you move through the project quicker. If you were to use a PVA or something that was a slow drying glue, that of course is fine, but you would need to wait for it to dry between sections, because it would need to stay flat so that things don't slide off while they dry. And I'm using bits of tape with some of these longer bits of bark because they don't bend entirely and they sort of pry up a little bit while they're drying, but the glue will hold it down once it sets. So I've just occasionally put tape. Now I did start putting some wool on early on here with some just a PVA type of glue, and quite generous with the PVA glue. I in the end decided to start more with the bark and then move on to the wool further down the track once the bark's in place. Now I actually have these little components that came from a necklace. They're actually polymer clay things that I made encasing beads. Now of course this is something I created and you won't have these on hand, but you could use any sort of glass cabochon or other decorative elements if you want, or you could just leave them out entirely and stick with the bark. Now I've used an E6000 glue to glue those down, and you can see I've used tape while they dry just to keep them held in place. It makes it a little easier, and you can glue them all the way around if you secure them well enough. I would suggest being very generous with the glue. You want to make sure these pieces of bark stick well. I'm sort of doing a mosaic with the bark. You can see that I'm breaking little pieces and trying to fit them into different areas of the pot. So, you know, have a feel around, see where it looks good. I've got a variety of bark as well to give a mix of textures, so some thicker barks, thinner, different colours. But you can do whatever you like for yours. You could stick to the one type of bark if you prefer to keep it more uniform, but I liked it a bit more natural looking. See, I've got my glue sitting upside down in a cup. It just helps because I don't have as much glue left, and it helps the glue go to the bottom and come out of the tip easier. So you may want to do something like that if you're having the same issue with your glue. Now you can see as well I've got the pot propped up underneath. That's actually a steel block for like wire work, like hammering metal and things, so it's quite heavy and it works perfectly to angle my piece. So you want to find something that you can use. It could be anything at all that helps prop up your pot. It makes it easier to work on if it's on an angle and you're working, you know, from above. So I am leaving some gaps between the bark because I know that I want to go in those gaps with other things. I'll be using fibres and other things to fill those gaps up, but I am still wanting to cover up the larger gaps. So you can see I'm sort of trying to fit pieces of bark in to the remaining gaps and fill it up slowly, piece by piece, sort of a bit of a Tetris puzzle. that tape got a little bit caught there, so I'm having to snip that off. I also find most of the longer pieces of bark I was having trouble with because they don't bend very well, so you either sort of need to snap them a little just to kind of bend them around the corner, or break them into smaller pieces so that they'll sit flush with your pot. So you can see a few more of those components now. If you're interested in finding out how to make those, let me know. I'd be happy to do a tutorial on how to create those pieces. I've got a bit of sticky tape stuck to my arm by the look of it as well, which I don't notice for some time, so you'll see a little bit of sticky tape and bark hanging off me for a little while, I think. So you can see I'm filling up that larger gap there, and you can see little smaller gaps that I'm leaving between the pieces. So now that it's filled with bark, I'm going in with my craft PVA glue. I'm being very generous with this glue because I want it to help keep the rest of it really strong and bind the bark and everything to the pot as well as the wool. So you can see I'm being very generous with how much I'm using. This is a silk thread. I was going to say wool, but that doesn't really make sense, does it? It's silk fibre that's got a lot of texture to it. You could use any sort of wool or fibre in this part. Just something with texture I would recommend. Have a look in your stash, see what you've got. Anything that's fibrous, that has different textures, play around with it and see what you've got that you can use to glue in these little gaps. You can see the different colours with that wool as well. It's the way it was dyed. Now I'm adding in some wool neps. They're a textured product that you can buy when you're doing felting. So again, just something with a bit of texture in it, something different. And I'm using silk tops and some wool tops as well, and then going over with my gloss varnish, which is what I use when I do my silk fusion. This helps bind those fibres together, and I'm just painting it straight on really, and being very generous to make sure that it does stick into everything as well. And I'm quite happy for it to sink into the glue and all sort of bind together, because that will add to the strength of the piece. I'm using a lot of jewel tones. I liked the look of the rich purples, oranges, greens and everything in the piece. I wanted to make sure though that the colours were all a little bit earthy, so they would all work together really well. You can see I'm going in with that gloss as well, just on top of some of the pieces I've already put down to strengthen those up. So you basically just work your way around, you know, and use your imagination. Have a look and see what materials you have on hand. I think, you know, sometimes you can be your most creative when you're using what you have on hand and working out the best way to put those things together, which is what I did for this project. I did go out and get the pot, but all of the other stuff that I am using, I actually had in my studio already. So be creative. This can be anything that you want it to be. So I have some Throster's waste here, which to me looks a little bit like moss or something growing on the bark. So I really enjoyed using some of this. It's a really lime green colour. I'm putting in just more of those nips. A lot of the woolen fibres I buy from Treetops. I'll link them below in case you're interested in any of the silk or wool fibres that I'm using in this piece. Of course, there's other places you can buy this stuff as well, so you know, have a look around. You may even have some of this on hand. So some of that Throster's waste I don't paint over entirely. I like the texture of it, so I don't want to completely flatten it. So I'm trying to put a little bit around the edges of it to keep it strong. I've got a dark green neps as well, so I've started putting little bundles of that in different places. I'm gluing that and then I'm going over it with the gloss as well, just to make sure that it's really strong, because they're little balls of wool essentially, and you know, it can be easy to miss one with a bit of glue and then it will eventually come off. So I'm trying to make sure that that doesn't happen. I had some other wool that had a bit of glitter in it, so it's a brown sort of wool that I put up top there. It's coming together now, as you can see. A lot of the areas are now filled, and I'm just going through the remaining gaps between the bark and adding wool and fibres and things as I feel it needs it. I'm being quite colourful with my design. As you can see, there's lime greens, there's reds, there's forest green, purple, all sorts of colours going in through there. You of course may decide that you want it to be more natural looking and may wish to stick with, you know, browns and keep it the colour of the bark, or maybe stick to a certain colour that's your favourite colour and do it that way. Just have a think about, I guess, the end result, what you want it to look like, and use that as a guide to your inspiration. I'm loving this Throster's waist. As you can see, it just really adds a little something. It looks just like moss to me, and I really love the texture of it. I'm a big texture fiend. I love mixing textures, and I think that's why I've really enjoyed using fibres and things in a lot of my work. One thing I would say anytime you're doing a design is to keep a unifying theme. So, you know, pick a certain palette of colours and stick to that, or keep a certain theme throughout the piece. Although this does look kind of wild and so many colours, you can see that I am sticking to certain materials and certain things that are keeping it unified. The bark, of course, keeps it tied together, and the components that I've used are all the same throughout the piece, just with different colours, and the colours all work together. So keep those things in mind when you're making choices of your design, and that way you will have something in the end that is cohesive. can see there's a lot of glue and a lot of the varnish by the end that goes into it. So that will keep everything really solid. I want to make sure that none of the bark comes off, that it is really strong and everything, all the components stay on the piece. So you can see all the colours now. It's quite rich in colour, and you know, lots of different jewel tones there. But to unify it a bit further, I decided to use some spray. So it's a copper mist spray. This is a similar spray as well. This is a green and brown spray, and so I just wanted to cover it all with that. And then while it's still wet, I go in with some copper glitter as well, and then also some gold glitter. You can see how that's starting to tie those colours together a bit more. It's more of a copper colour with hints of colour coming through that. I decide though I want a bit more texture on the bark, so I've gone in with a gold wax, and you can just use your finger for this. It's probably the easiest way actually, and I'm not covering everything, I'm just covering little bits of texture. The bark that's sort of sticking out, I'm focusing on that. Anything that has a little bit of texture with the bark, I'm just rubbing over that slightly, and that just brings out that texture a little bit. So that's just about done now, and this is the first tutorial to the jewellery tree. Obviously I'll be going into the actual tree making in the next video. Now you can do whatever you like for your pot. You could even skip this step and buy a pot, but I thought this was a little bit of fun to make something, you know, really cool and Sort of like a magical fairy garden. It's a bit closer up to, and when it's dry, to give you an idea of how it looks when it's done. I hope you enjoyed this. Stay tuned for part 2 of the tutorial. See you, craft nerds!